Hi, Sue Stockdale here again, your host for the Sports 2000 podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of this British sports car prototype series, talking to some of the people involved in making it happen, and giving you an insight into why Sports 2000 is sometimes called motorsport's best kept secret. For episode 29 today, my guest is SRCC Sports 2000 coordinator Alan Jones. Alan reflects with me on his experience with the club to date and explains his role at a race meeting, where he is responsible for liaising between drivers and race control to ensure the smooth running of their races. Alan is retired as competition secretary for the HSCC. Now that's Historic Sports Car Club, and Alan talks to me about his route into motorsport and gives me an insight into some of those difficulties that arise when organising a race meeting over the last 16 years of when he worked with HSCC. Welcome to the podcast, Alan. Good to speak to you today.
Hello, Sue. How are you? All right?
I'm great. Yeah, thank you. I understand, Alan, you have a pretty important job in the Sports 2000 community, and it's something to do with liaison.
That's close. What I actually do is I'm the coordinator for the series. Now, in my situation, that is something that we handle on the day. In other championships, the coordinator has partly a back office job as well as being there on the day. But I purely work on the day. And the primary tasks is liaison between the officials and the drivers. Now, the important part for the driver is to make sure that I get them into all the right places at the right time. And this starts with the first day. We generally have a briefing. So we need to make sure that they're all there so they don't miss anything that the clerks have got to tell them. Then after that, to keep the race meeting running smoothly, we ensure that we're there into the assembly, or as some may think of it as the collecting area, prior to either going out to qualify or out to race. They're there in good time so that as soon as the track's ready, they can be out. It is an advantage for organisers to be able to run a little bit ahead of time, because that means if they have a problem during the day, it won't interfere with the other races that are following.
So does that mean that you need to know where all the drivers are at any given moment to try and corral them into one space? Because I imagine it's a little bit like herding cats at times.
Yes, that's a well-used analogy, herding cats. We do have this little device, because the majority of people now have mobile phones, and we set up a WhatsApp group specifically to message them. Of course, not all the time will a driver have his phone in his pocket. So it's always useful for me to know locations, so that if I can't find, if somebody seems to be missing, I have the opportunity to go and find them and say, look, this is what we're doing.
I imagine then you need to know who all the drivers are in both the Duratec and the Pinto categories. And sometimes those drivers are changing or there's new people joining.
It's a good help. When I first joined Sports 2000, I knew very few of them. I was coming in rather cold. But no, it's always useful to know them and to be able to recognise them. I still get a little bit confused because this is only my second year with them. But on the whole, I do know all the drivers now.
So that leads me to ask you about how come you did get into being part of the Sports 2000 community and doing this role, Alan.
Well, that goes back to me retiring from my day job. I'd been involved in race organisation for 16 years with another group, and I retired primarily due to a health issue. But as I was getting ready to leave my work, I got approached by a certain Mr. Mike Turner, who I think most people will know quite well within Sports 2000s. And he said to me, "What are you thinking of doing when you retire?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "I think I've probably got something for you." And that's where we went on to from there.
Now, of course, listener, we have interviewed Mike in a previous episode of this podcast, so you can find out all about his background there. And he is very good at networking and making connections, so bringing his strengths to bear as well, no doubt, Alan, and introducing you into the Sports 2000 community. What made you say yes then?
I didn't want to be completely distant from motorsport. It's one of the answers. It's been a part of my life for a long time. Second, as you know, Mike is quite persuasive. And I thought, well, if everybody's going to be like Mike, then it would be nice to come along and see if they're prepared to accept me, because a lot of them wouldn't have known me. So it's a case of acceptance, because it's the only way I could actually do this job successfully.
And given that you mentioned a moment ago that you have now been involved in Sports 2000 for almost 2 years, what were your first impressions and have they changed since you've now got to know everybody?
First impressions was how welcoming they are, because as I said, I came in fairly fresh. There was a few people there that I knew, but the majority I didn't. But everybody was very welcoming. And it is a terrific community to be involved with. They are very supportive of each other. So whilst they are competitive on track, the minute they're off track, what they look to do is to support each other. And I think that is a very, very important part of what they do. As an example, we were at Castle Combe this previous weekend. A number of people experienced problems, and immediately whoever was close by them said, right, let's have a look at this. We can sort this out. And I think the main example, which you'll find out about, was in the Duotec race. Josh Law, who's one of the leading contenders in the championship and a current champion, had a problem which resulted in his car going off, damaging it, and they were looking at saying, well, that's it, we're going home, or packing up for the weekend. Everybody rallied round. There was people from all the directions of the paddock coming to them saying, I can get you this, I can sort this out, I've rung somebody else, we can go and see them. And they were back on track the next day, and they had a good race. So that's the kind of people I'm with.
That's a consistent message that we hear from all the guests on this podcast about the supportive nature of the community for Sports 2000. So I'm glad to hear you're experiencing that as well, Alan, in your short time with Sports 2000. Now, you mentioned also that you've had a career in motorsport previously, a full-time role. I understand you were competition secretary for HSCC. Is that correct?
That's true, yes. As I said, I did that one role for 16 years. It was a full-time position and it kept you very, very busy. You may think that race organisation, you start in March and you probably end of the season in October, but it's actually a 12-month occupation, because in between times when it's quiet in the off-season, then you're preparing for the next year. That particular club ran 18 championships and series, all of which have to be approved by Motorsports UK. So all of those regulations will have to be updated each year and were submitted. As a race organiser, you then have to get a permit to organise a race meeting at a particular venue. All of those are done in advance and done away from time. And just to add to that little mixture, this particular club, we actually went to 3 exhibitions in the winter too. And that was a case of getting the cars too.
So that sounds like it's quite a mix of skills that are required to manage the logistics. And I'm imagining also a bit of negotiation and attention to detail would be some of the things that immediately spring to my mind. What would you think were the most important skills that you used in that role, Alan?
The most important things are very often you listen before you speak. You work in motorsport, which can be at times a volatile situation. There's a lot of adrenaline and testosterone involved. So the first thing you don't do is to wade into a situation. You keep calm when all around you are losing their heads, So that's one of the things. You're working for a club. So you always remembered that when you're working for a club, it's the members who are directing you. And it's not like a business. So you have to have that ability to work with people, to listen to people, and wherever possible, accommodate them. You can't please everybody all the time. So you're always going to have somebody that's upset. And the other thing you've got to have is thick skin from time to time.
Yeah, I can imagine that from what you're describing here. I'm wondering, as you recall that career that you did have in that competition secretary role, what were some of perhaps the most challenging moments that stand out for you, and how did you manage to overcome them?
The most pleasing thing on any race weekend was 9 o'clock in the morning. You heard the cars go out and yes, everything's working, because there are times when it gets very close to the wire for things to work or not work. Things like a rescue unit will have broken down on the way to the circuit. Tracks are licensed for the number of rescue units you must have before you can operate. So one of the vital lessons I did learn was always try and ensure that you ordered above the minimum. And we always did the same with ambulances. If there's a big emergency and an ambulance has to go away from the track, If you haven't got sufficient cover, that race meeting stops and you've then got the problems of timing. And the other little thing that we used to get involved with, there's an event called the Silverstone Classic, or it's now renamed the Silverstone Festival. It's a big event which incorporates not just classic motorsport, but there are displays, track parades, there's live music of an evening, all takes place. Now, we only get involved with what's happening on the track. The other parts are taken part of by the overall promoter. But one of the things they liked was to have parades and demonstrations. Now, you have to get your permit modified by Motorsport UK to say, this is what you can do. And they invariably like to have some detail from you as to what exactly has happened and how it's going to be run. Now, you didn't always get the information straight away. And then secondly, you couldn't always get hold of the person at Motorsport UK who would say, yes, Alan, you got it. And I can remember we were sitting there one Friday morning, start of the event, and the man himself walked in to actually sign off and say, yes, you can do that. Now, when you're thinking about an event where people have paid quite a bit of money, you probably have up to 80,000 spectators for the 3 days. It does rather get a bit pressurized. But that's the way it was.
Yeah, I can imagine that level of responsibility on your shoulders and just hoping that the right person on that given occasion would appear and sign the documentation for you. Must have been a little bit stressful at times.
It could be. This particular promoter was always like to throw you some odd curveballs. And they used to organise a media test day. So the test was available to people who were taking part in the race meeting. And the idea was that then journalists and things would be invited along. At one time they did passenger rides, etc. But they also did demonstrations and brought some of the leading cars that were going to be there. On this one particular occasion, I was told that Mr. David Coulthard was going to be attending. That's okay. Is he going to sign on? Because apparently he's going to take a car out. Yeah, okay. You better go and find him. David was a true gentleman, perfectly organised. His assistant came up and saw me and said, would you like to come down and see David now? He had all his documents ready, signed away. It was a great pleasure to deal with him.
Well, I'm glad some of the activities that you were involved in turned out well. Are there any other memorable occasions in your career that stick in your mind as being particularly enjoyable or highlights?
One was having a half-hour conversation when I was alone in the office one evening with a certain Rowan Atkinson.
Was he a motorsport fan?
He's a big motorsport fan. And we actually talked about his race car because he was looking to bring it to race with us. That was terrific. The other person I'll mention is Chris Rea. He's quite a character because he's very, very down to earth. Another one who's really into his motorsport, as I'm sure you probably appreciate. But we had a team of ladies who would do the signing on, and they'd come in there and there'd be this terrific banter between them and Chris Rea, and it was always a pleasure to be around, you know. That was good fun, yeah. Other things probably most people wouldn't connect with, but I'll give you a brief idea. My background comes from club motorsport, but I've been going motor racing since 1965 as a boy. And my dad took me first to qualifying for a big event, a non-championship Formula One race. But normally we couldn't afford to do those big events, and we'd go to the little club events. And one of the characters that used to come along, he was very well known for going for records. Because at the time, that was the thing you could do. There was Libre races. So literally, as it says in the title, free formula. And guys would come along with the idea of seeing who could get the outright lap record. Okay? Well, this one particular gentleman was a guy called Jim Moore. And in the time he was racing, I never got to meet him. And then one year, we were at an autosport show. We got our stand there. And this guy came along. We stopped talking. He said, I'm Jim Moore. And yeah, that was super. I really, really enjoyed that conversation. We had a few more conversations after that, but that was good. Meeting Jim Walsh was another thing, but I did that again once he'd retired from racing. Jim was a fantastic Formula Ford racer, really fantastic in the days of the Crompton lighting at Silverstone. in those days on the club circuit, you had this wonderful long straight, club straight, that would come down and they'd go into a 90-degree hairpin into Woodcote Corner, the last corner. And you could sit in the stand and you'd look up, you see one car. And as they approached, one car became 2, 3, sometimes there'd be 4, and they're all heading to this same corner. And you'd be thinking, now, who's going to get round? It didn't really matter which line he took. Jim Walsh was normally the one who ended up crossing the line first. He was a brilliant driver, and yeah, he was great fun. And again, he was one of those people I got to meet. That was again through an autosport show. A certain James Beckett organised it too. So that was good. That was great.
Oh, wonderful. It's lovely, I'm sure, when you get to meet the people that you're watching drive around the circuit and doing incredible things there, Alan.
It is. It's great. I've always been on the sidelines. I've never actually been in the cockpit of a car. But having said that, I've done most of the other jobs. I've marshalled. In fact, at Pembrey one year, I was marshalling for 750 Motor Club, and we used to be very short of marshals for these events. So you'd have to multitask. And at the end of one day, I came in and this little Welshman came up to me and said, "You are flagging virtuoso, you are." So that was my marshalling career. And from there, we got involved with doing timekeeping, mainly, again, doing club bits, but we occasionally did a couple of the touring car rounds. When touring car used to have Formula 3, it was a double bill in those days. We did that. We took a year off and then got persuaded to come back into motorsport, and we became club stewards. That was again with 750 Motor Club. What else have we done? And so, yes, we've been around, but the one thing we don't do is get into cockpits. I think I'd be positively dangerous.
And I think you also have done some photography, you mentioned to me.
Oh, yeah, I did a little bit of that. It all sort of goes back to my original ambition, which never quite realised. My original ambition was to be a motorsport journalist, and I quite enjoyed writing. It was one of the things I enjoyed doing. So I did my shorthand and my typing, and it came to 18, and bang, it never happened because there was no job opportunities, so I had to go out and earn a living instead. But at that time, my dad bought me a SLR camera. So this is one I could put a Ezcurra lens into. And I went off and started photographing cars, which was great fun. And it was the photography that introduced me to my wife as well, which led on to other things, and which I'll explain as I go along. But we eventually started doing this motorsport photography as a bit of a hobby. And we took part in an exhibition at Milton Keynes, which is organised by the Marshals Club there. And we were then approached by somebody there saying, "Would you like to come and do some photography for the Marshals Club? And we'll organise for you to go to Donington." So we did a little bit of that. We saw some bits and pieces. And at that time, a friend of mine was editor of the local paper. And so I was coming along with photographs and stories of the people who raced locally. And so I ended up doing a little bit of photojournalism as well. But like everything else, it was a phase, and then it petered out and we moved on.
So you've already just given us some lovely descriptions about all of these different aspects of motorsport that you've experienced, from competition secretary, photography, marshalling, liaison with the Sports 2000 community, and so on. It seems to me you must have a really rich perspective of motorsport from all angles, and you've been in it for such a long time, Alan. I'm wondering, what have you noticed that have been perhaps some of the significant changes over the period that you've been around and involved in motorsport?
I suppose the most significant change is something that we all will have observed, the advance in technology. So at the top level, it's very much the technology that drives success. But luckily, as you move back down into club motorsport, where people are doing this as a hobby, you've still got the driver that makes the difference. So, people sometimes get very confused. It's one of the things that I've experienced since being involved in organisation. People think if somebody is awfully successful, they must be having something trick with their car, or whatever. They pursue it to no end. There are some people who are just naturally gifted. You put them behind the wheel of a car and boom, away they go. Within the Sports 2000s, you can see it with Charlie Hyatt. He doesn't use a computer. His dad offered to lead him round Castle Combe because he hadn't been there before. He said, "No, Dad, I'm all right." He got a lap record, Castleton.
Amazing.
First time out. So there are some people who can just do it. I suppose my leaning is still towards club racing because it's where I grew up. And I also very much enjoy the historic side of racing, mainly because the cars are individual. You can identify them. A lot of modern racing tends to be one make, and you identify who's who by a colour scheme or a helmet, rather than saying, oh, look, that's... So those are the main differences I've seen.
And in terms of the individualism of each car, do you see that still exists within Sports 2000, within the historic Pinto category?
Within the historic Pinto category, yes. I mean, you do have particular chassis that's become dominant, but you look at the grid from this last weekend, which the uncharacteristically was a little bit small, but at least you've got 3 chassis there that were dominant. So you've got Royale, you've got Tigger, you've got Lola straight away. So they are there. And even within the Duratec, you do have Gun as well as MCR as challenges, and there is still some Van Diemen's out there too. So even within the Duratec, there's still some variety in there.
Now, one of the things I always ask our guests, Alan, on the podcast is their favourite circuit of choice. Given I'm imagining that you've been to many circuits around the UK, what ones do you enjoy attending at?
Okay, so the ones that I particularly enjoy may not be quite suitable to all the drivers because I'm enjoying them as a spectator point of view rather than anything else. Within the UK, I love going to Cadwell Park. I mean, really, it's a bike circuit that allows cars to race. I've been there quite a few times. Countryside around it is beautiful, and walking around Cadwell is fantastic. It's a circuit that my parents enjoyed going to, and it does test the driver. I know it's difficult for one to overtake there, but you do find out who can drive a car. And going back into history, it's one of the circuits that Ayrton Senna couldn't drive. He piled off there. So it's a true test of driving skill. And as a comparison, last year I went to Portimao, and Portimao is basically Cadwell on steroids. It's an amazing circuit to see. It is fantastic. But going back into the UK, I like Brands Hatch and the Indy circuit because, again, you can view it all, and it does make for some quite exciting racing. The new look Snetterton, the 300 circuit. Hats off to Mr. Palmer. He's done a terrific job. There are a number of really good vantage points where you can not only see the cars, but I still like to take photographs. I can actually take some photos there as well. Mind you, the same is true of Cadwell Park too. You can get some fantastic shots there.
So it's good to hear from a spectator perspective what makes a circuit enjoyable as well from your vantage point, Alan, as a place to perhaps get some good photographs. And of course, we have KJG Photography as part of the Sports 2000 community who also provide us often with fantastic photographs.
He's a good lad. And yes, I really like Kevin. He's a great photographer.
Alan, talking about circuits, it's a nice segue into thinking about where do you normally stand when a race is on? Given that you've got a job of work to do in terms of liaison, does that finish when all the cars are out on track? So
Sports 2000, I'm there to do a job. And so I'm actually up in race control. So you tend to be looking at a bank of screens. So it's times I can find it quite difficult to follow. But I'm there, so I'm next to the clerk so that between us we can say, I'd like to see somebody, or can you... Conversely, I often get, with our lot, I get told, would you like to go and thank them? Because they are so good with safety car. They are very, very observant. They're very good. And I think one of my most common things I get asked is, Alan, can you go and convey my thanks to so-and-so? Because he's done such a good job with that. But then away from our races, if I've got some time, I'll tend to go off at Brands again. You tend to go up to around Paddock Hill or Druids to get a good look at what's going on. Alton Park's another nice circuit. I can wander away. I can go up to the top there. I can either go to the first corner or that final corner. Again, nice viewing and get a few pictures as well.
Now, Alan, you're working as coordinator within Sports 2000 these days. I also know that you had a previous experience of Sports 2000 way back when. What's that all about?
So Sports 2000 was very much on the menu for race meetings I used to go and see. And over the years, I've come to know a couple of the period drivers. When I was with HSCC, a gentleman by the name of Chris Alford, one of the early racers, he was very much around because he lived at Silverstone. So we had regular talks about Sports 2 then. And of course, the other connection, which is a little bit more vague, is that to Mr. John Brinley. Now, John actually met my wife first through her accountancy work. She was going out to do some bookkeeping for him. And so we got to meet John. He came to her 50th birthday party. And we've known him quite well since. But I mean, John at the time, aside from doing Sports 2000, was also very involved with a certain Mr. John Fulston and his various historic cars as well. So I've known and watched John for a number of years. And the last one I should mention, otherwise you'll tell me off, Mr. Mike O'Brien. Mike is now team operator as a Speed Sport. He's got a little gallery as well at Silverstone. But Mike is another very, very competitive Sports 2000 driver from back in the day.
And does the racing look the same these days to what it was like back in the day watching it?
Certainly within the Pinto classes, it's still as competitive and as interesting as it ever was. Yes, certainly.
Now, I have one final question for you, Alan. I haven't asked you already, is given that you've talked about how your job is liaison, I'm wondering whether there's anything that you would want the drivers to be thinking about that would make your life a little bit easier.
The drivers are very well behaved. What would help me, because I'm still trying to encourage them, they've got me writing race reports this year, and I'm trying to encourage them to put me back into their cockpit for the little bits that I don't get to see from my eerie and race control. I have some super information that's sat on the table beside me at the moment, which is the race logs from race control, so I know who's gone off where. TSL provide me with a very good lap chart, so I've got that bit as well, but it doesn't put me in the car. So that's the one thing I need to encourage them to do, is I do provide them with my email, and I'm on the WhatsApp as well. So few more of those. Some of them have been very good and been in touch, but more the merrier. So
looking ahead to the remainder of this season within Sports 2000, what are you looking forward to in particular?
Donington's great. I like going to Donington. I'm hoping that the grids were going to continue to grow. We've had a lot of people come out, but never all at the same time. So I'm hoping that these will start to come together, because we've got some really good racing, and it's going to be interesting for the top for the Durotex, because those two boys both Josh and Michael are in a league of their own at the moment. But one of the people that's coming to my attention all the time is Paul Traherne, as well as Richard Johnson. I mean, they're doing a great job as well. I'm certainly hoping to see Richard get to a track where perhaps he can get in amongst them, because he works very hard at it. The Pintos are just good racing anyway. They don't have the same sophisticated aerodynamics that the Durotex have, so they do tend to slipstream a bit more, which does make for some really good racing.
Wonderful. Well, I hope to catch up with you at one of those circuits later in the year, Alan, and to be able to perhaps share some spot on the spectator area along with you, and maybe get some good photographs myself.
Oh, of course.
It's been lovely to talk to you today, Alan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Sue.
Well, it was lovely to talk to Alan Jones today and hear all about his experience. Please help us spread the word about this podcast by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. And remember to tell your friends about this podcast too. And you can connect with us on social media at Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. So I look forward to connecting with you soon and bringing you another episode of the Sports 2000 podcast.